Hi, everybody. So, as people are joining, just want to welcome everyone to the latest episode of All Tech is Humans webinar series, where we engage in conversations with responsible tech leaders to discuss some of the world's thorniest tech and society issues. So, we're really glad you are joining us today on a Friday afternoon for this really important conversation. So, please take a moment to say hi to one another in the chat. We'd love to know a little about you. Tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm your host today. I'm the executive director of All Tech is Human. We are a nonprofit that brings together the global responsible tech community. So you can find out how to get involved with our work at alltechishuman.org. You'll see we have different activities across 3 work streams. We have multi-stakeholder collaboration and community building. We have multidisciplinary education and resource development. And then we also focus on responsible tech careers. So today's conversation is part of our series this month in responsible AI. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by Amba and Sarah Myers-West, the co-executive directors of the AI Now Institute, an independent research institute equipping the field with expert analysis to challenge and reimagine the current trajectory of AI. So Amba leads on advancing diagnosis and actionable policy recommendations to tackle concerns with artificial intelligence and concentrated power. Amba recently completed her term as senior advisor on AI at the Federal Trade Commission. And Sarah's focus is on addressing the market incentives and infrastructures that shape tech's role in society at large and ensuring that it serves the interests of the public. So we're super excited to have both of you with us today. Welcome, Amba and Sarah.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So thank you both for agreeing to sit down with me for this conversation. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions for our guests at any point, we ask that you please drop those into the Q&A function so that we can see it, because questions tend to get lost in the chat. We're going to choose a few of those questions to bring in toward the end, and at any point, just go ahead and drop those into the Q&A. All right, so for a little bit of background context, on July 23rd, the White House unveiled America's AI Action Plan, and that prioritizes winning the AI race, is how they framed that. And they have identified over 90 federal policy actions across 3 pillars. So accelerating innovation, building American AI infrastructure, and leading in international diplomacy and security. So they have a few areas of emphasis. Those are exporting American AI, promoting rapid build out of data centers, removing federal regulations to enable innovation and adoption, and then updating federal procurement guidelines to prioritize free speech in frontier models, or you could also talk about that as examining system prompts to potentially remove guardrails that were attempting to counteract biases in the training data. And AI Now Institute has in response to this, launched the People's AI Action Plan, which is what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to kick things off here with this first question. I want to ask about the origin story of the People's AI Action Plan. How did this initiative come about?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And again, just like thank you for having us. We're All Tech is Human fans, and it's a really incredible community you all have built. So the story of the People's AI Action Plan, it's, I would say it's the crystallization of what a lot of us are probably feeling right now, which is that the vision for AI is currently being written by and for the interests of a handful of giant tech companies. And that likely one of the best tools we have to try to challenge or do something about this direction is to start articulating what the alternative vision looks like. AI dominance, like you just mentioned, that's the frame that's clearly responding to a very narrow set of geopolitical, defense, and maybe most importantly, industry interests. But that's increasingly feeling like their plan. So what's ours? And tactically, this particular initiative, which the People's AI Action Plan, it took off on the heels of the fight against the AI regulation moratorium proposal, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It kind of did blow up in the news for a little while, but essentially it was a proposal that was they were trying to sneak it in through the budget reconciliation process, but it would essentially ban states across the country from regulating or enforcing AI regulation. And eventually it was defeated in the 11th hour, thanks to a really widespread public and bipartisan pushback from many different corners. And, we could all agree that that plan was an unmitigated bad idea. It created this also a widespread recognition that, okay, the kind of most powerful actors in the AI industry that are backing this proposal are becoming, more and more brazen, and they're acting out even against the most common sense protections, for kids, for workers, deep fakes, the kind of stuff that really, makes up most of state regulation. So it's like, I think soon after that, there was momentum. We had defeated the really bad thing. But then the question was like, how do we build on this momentum to push for a more proactive, a more positive agenda? And could we get a similarly large coalition together, aligned on, at a high enough level, could we find that common ground? And so what the People's AI Action Plan is now, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's going to be an evolving platform, is for now just a high level value statement that foregrounds, the biggest constituency that is missing from what we're seeing from industry and White House plans right now, which is everyday people. And, we did it in pre-battle mode. So the day before the White House came out with their plan, we released we sort of launched this broad coalition. It got pretty swift sign-on from a very, very wide coalition of actors. And yeah, that was the intention.
Incredible. So as you were putting this together, putting the People's AI Action Plan together, what were your goals as you were putting this together? Like, what are the ultimate goals for the campaign overall?
Yeah, so good question. And I think we've been talking about this too, both in terms of what were the goals that we went into this with, but also like coming out of this, what has felt the most valuable. And I think there's two parts of it. One part is the kind of outward or the external facing goals, like who were the audiences, external audiences, power, folks with power on the outside who can do something about this that we were trying to reach. And also there were some more inward facing goals. So I'll talk about both. On the kind of external side, this was in some senses a straightforward counter narrative platform, right? We're trying to reach the media who's going to cover this in a particular way. We're trying to reach policymaker audiences. And what is the message we're sending? That there is a genuine and a growing public constituency that is engaged on AI issues and that they cannot be ignored. So, just waving the threat of China or saying we need to win against China in the AI race cannot act as a kind of gag order against asking pretty fundamental questions, like how do we ensure that this tech transformation is responsible, that it takes us in the direction of the world we want to live in, not the world we definitely don't want to live in, right? So all of those things. But and I think on those fronts, the kind of pre-battle strategy, so coming in early and kind of setting the frame, especially when journalists were, hungry for takes before they were flooded with the White House press releases, was very effective. And we have some lessons there. But equally, I think there were the kind of internal goals of this, which is part of the point, part of why we're doing this was the journey. And so it, and I think you all have been doing this through network building. It's about building those muscles for how do you create a broader movement that, especially in this moment where sometimes it can feel like the headwinds are just like they're just moving in a direction. It's all inevitable. It feels like, a lot of us can feel disempowered. I think shaking ourselves out of that cynicism collectively to start articulating, okay, where do we want to be headed? And I think one of the things we continuously navigated through the process of putting this together was that how do we frame this common ground in terms that allows the widest possible audience to see themselves in this fight, to see their work, their movements, their fights as connected. So like our one example that I think more people are talking about now is that, the recent AI push or the ways in which AI is affecting white collar tech workers and actually non-tech workers as well, right? They're seeing the ways in which productivity monitoring tools are being used to reduce their autonomy or to surveil their workflows and eventually replace them, guess who's really expert on those issues? It's warehouse workers who for years have been pushing back against exactly this kind of technology and this kind of pipeline from surveillance to automation. So I think there was even in putting together the coalition, we could see these healthy opportunities for bridge building and to build solidarity and see yourselves in the same Zoom call, but eventually see yourselves as part of the same movement going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, All Tech is Human has really similar ethos around, the fact that these technologies, there's nothing inevitable about them, and they are built by us and should reflect what we as the people want, and want these technologies to do in our lives. And having opportunities for the public to engage in these ways is incredibly important. So great work. I want to talk a little bit about that dominance theme throughout that AI action plan. So wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the White House push for AI dominance is already affecting the American public.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw the sort of the seeds of this push really come immediately after the inauguration. On day 3, Trump signed an executive order that rolled back essentially all of the existing guardrails that had been implemented under the Biden administration for responsible AI. With very few exceptions. So the action plan that was released last week really kicks that into full gear. It includes things like a very big push to use AI across the government, and notably without any guardrails, which makes our core institutions like healthcare, education, our financial systems more obscure and more unequal. And I think we're all going to be feeling the effects of that as it takes shape. There's also this significant push, in the name of shoring up AI dominance, to build out energy and data center infrastructures. And the communities where this gets built out are going to be directly impacted. What this looks like is the rollback of environmental rules that have protected communities, ensuring that they have clean air, clean water. It includes, the use of data centers that are taxing the energy grid in the communities where they're built, so that can lead to higher costs for electricity, more instability in the grid, more blackouts. There are community health challenges in the form of, increased rates of asthma and other respiratory illnesses, noise pollution from like the sound of a data center in your backyard. So there's a lot of different ways where, local communities, across the United States are starting to feel the effects of this push for infrastructural dominance.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So as we're looking at the People's AI Action Plan, one thing I think is really interesting about it is that it really draws from the priorities of each of its signatories. So there are a lot of different organizations that are included in this, and you have these people-centered policy priorities that come from each of these different organizational signatories of the plan. So can you tell us about, from AI Now's perspective, what are some of your policy priorities and proposals?
Absolutely. So, coming out of the experience Amba and I had where we were working within the FTC to, think about the role of AI in the wider economy, one of the things that became really clear from that experience was that addressing the very high levels of concentrated power in the industry needs to be a top line priority that's threaded through any kind of policy intervention that you make. You can't make progress on any goal, whether that's, dealing with AI bias or dealing with privacy and surveillance concerns or dealing with, name your issue, unless you're grappling with concentrated power, unless the intervention sort of confronts that power, you're not going to be able to make a lot of movement. So with that thesis, we articulated an agenda around zero trust AI. And within that agenda, there's a few different components. One is to enact common sense, bright line rules that combat the worst harms. Now, this is really important to protect people from things like fraudulent AI, from scams, from like high levels of surveillance in workplaces, from unfair and discriminatory uses of AI. But it also makes sense for the market too, right? Like it makes sense to have rules that are making sure that like bad apples are weeded out. Like nobody wants to have that kind of association. The agenda also articulates the need for structural interventions that really get at the heart of the problem. And there we're thinking through things like structural separations in the market that deal with the concentrated of power, especially in cloud infrastructure firms, your Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, which have a chokehold on the market. They dominate the resources that are needed to build large-scale AI. They also control the like access to the market because they run these ecosystems that, you need to be able to deploy, AI applications and reach the end consumer. And so thinking through the ways that skews market incentives, that gives them outsized power in the market, where if you're building a startup, you have to, if you're an OpenAI or an Anthropic or a smaller firm, you feel this like gravitational pull to strike a deal with the cloud firms because they control the key resources that are necessary for your viability. And then thirdly, the zero trust agenda articulates the importance of having procedural mechanisms that are going to ensure oversight and accountability across the tech stack. That we have rules that are appropriate and ensure accountability in ways that deal with those that are involved in putting together large data sets for training, for cloud providers, for application developers, for people who are building large-scale models and fine-tuning those models. The like regulatory apparatus likely looks somewhat different for each of those entities, but it's important that we have those mechanisms in place and also ensure that they're sort of playing together nicely. So we don't put all of the onus on, let's say, a small application developer that doesn't have insight into the training data that was used to build the large model that they fine-tuned and built an application off of. So we need to make sure that there are these like information and accountability cascades across the tech stack.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
No, that's it.
No, great. Especially that last one. That is, we're feeling that a lot at All Tech is Human. The accountability across that cascade. I like how you put that. So, when I'm thinking through everyone who has signed on, you have, I believe, over 90 different organizations, maybe more at this point, that have signed on to this. Can you tell us a little bit about the types of organizations that have signed on, and also wondering, are there any audiences that you're hoping to include more engagement from as the campaign picks up steam?
Yeah, and maybe just first to carry forward from your last question, right? Like what Sarah painted is where AI now, as an organization that's particularly concerned about concentrated power, is like putting our energy. But if you look at the kind of proposals that's come from the body or coalition of now, it's 120 is the number. And counting organizations, you'll see that there are similarly robust proposals that touch upon, copyright or privacy or kid safety. And I think that there's, that the breadth and body of proposals that live in the collective work of this coalition, I think also speaks to the fact that, we will have common ground. It will be had at a high level, but that doesn't come at the expense of, concreteness. The concreteness lives in the work that we're all doing and the agendas that we're trying to advance. So, but to come back to your question, when I looked at that list, and we were obviously in the process of building the coalition as step by step and actively trying to bring new communities in. And it really started telling that story of where and how AI is touching people's lives across sectors, right? So the nurses union, the American Federation for Teachers, the cultural industries. We had the Writers Guild, so that's on the labor front, but also across the multiple identities we hold as people, and like the ways in which those are potentially being threatened or there are concerns with AI. So our identity as parents, as workers, as creators, as immigrants, as small businesses, right? And so I think that there's something powerful, or there's a powerful story even in looking at the breadth of the list and then trying to, someone will look at it and be like, wait, what does the Clean Energy Council of, Virginia have to do with this? And that kind of opens up room to say, wait, actually the AI supply chain isn't just the, ChatGPT interface you're looking at. It goes to the kind of more material infrastructures that sustain this paradigm, and that kind of opens up its own bucket of questions. So all that to say that I think there's, to the extent that this is a vehicle for storytelling to a much broader audience, I think there's a lot of power there. And just to like name, I named, nurses, teachers, service workers, parents groups that are concerned with child safety. We have several groups, community groups that are really worried about the effects of pollution on their children's health. We have a number of disability advocacy groups that are protecting disabled workers in particular. Legal aid clinics that are protecting the poor and are worried about the integration of AI into Medicaid and Medicare systems and the ways in which that is being used to inhibit the assistance that people receive. You have immigrants' rights groups. You have small business, anti-monopoly organizations that are fighting for small businesses to have a fair chance in this economy. And finally, I guess most relevant to this group, right? There's a number of key, groups of technologists and researchers who are actively involved in that, that reimagination. Like, can we build tech around, a different vision and also along different incentive structures?
And
And
what?
you said into, sorry, you also asked like, who do we want to bring
Yes.
into this? I think that the list really goes on and on, but maybe what I'll say, given that this is a group that is, more technology sector adjacent, I think just having many more voices from within the tech, within the tech industry would be extremely powerful, because I think it helps cut against any idea that anyone that's pushing back or critiquing right now is anti-progress or anti-technology. I think, we see this all the time, but there couldn't be anything more positive than actually fighting the fight to say, we want to imagine a future for technology and for society that works for everyone. And I think, it's strategically really important, but also I think important for all of the groups I mentioned to see themselves as not, separate from, but potentially part of a fight with technologists within this industry that are fighting for a different trajectory and a different vision.
Completely agree with that. And I think it's a great testament to your ability to bring so many different groups together that have these different pieces of the whole picture of what would a people's AI action plan look like, and bringing in different sectors and different roles that people as an individual person can play in across their life. So that's really fantastic. And I'm curious, we do have an audience question. I want to invite some more audience questions, so please chime in as we're starting to kind of wrap up my part of this and pulling in your questions, not just mine. So the last question I have for you is, what are the next steps for the People's AI Action Plan as you're looking forward? What's next for you?
Yeah, good question. And actually, we're in the process of, having a conversation on where we take this next. There are a number of different threads that are actually already live in terms of how we might translate this at the local, city, and federal level into, efforts that have more political and policy momentum behind them. But also the implementation of the action plan is largely going to take place in the fall, and so maybe some efforts around that. But I think the bigger question, and I would like, this will necessarily be a collective one, is to think of like, what is, we've started seeing the contours of of a really broad movement, right? At least in terms of the interests that are represented, even if this isn't like mass movement scale yet. But I think it could be like, what are those rallying cries, those specific calls to action that we think a similarly large group, can we get to a level of specificity, a level of concreteness, but yet retain this big tent so that we can move this agenda forward more practically? Policy is one vehicle, but, also speaking to labor unions and others. So yeah, I guess it's the big question of like, where do we take this in the world? If I guess it goes without saying, but if you're interested in being, a part of these efforts, part of this brainstorming, please reach out to us. The email is on the People's AI Action website, and we'll be holding these like more group meetings to have these discussions later in the fall.
Absolutely. And those some links are in the chat right now as well. And in the follow-up email to all attendees, you'll also be getting some of these links. So yeah, appreciate that. All right, so I am going to turn to a couple of audience questions now. So we're going to start with a question from Karina Alexanian. Hi, Karina. Would be interested in their response to China's recent AI strategy release. So I'm not sure if either of you have had an opportunity to dig into that yet, but if either of you have just an initial response, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, sounds good. And thank you, Karina, for that question. We haven't, I don't know, Sarah, if you have, I haven't had the chance to look at it closely, but in the past, AI Now has been, I think that the way with which we approach this is often China's approach to AI, the actual specifics are really missing from the conversation, and the way it's brought up is much more as a strategic vehicle to, as I said, censor any conversation about how AI is affecting everyday Americans. And so it's like, we want to talk about jobs, we want to talk about kid safety, and it's always like, oh, but what about China? So I think I want to caution the use of China as a way of redirecting against conversations that that conversation needs to happen, but equally urgent and under there are a series of interests and conversations that are not getting enough airtime because everything is being termed in sort of framed in terms of geopolitical interests. The other thing I would want to say is that we've done some work with, a body of research, researchers that have been spending a lot of time actually getting to the specifics of Chinese policy on AI. And one of the things you will keep hearing from them is that it's often asserted that China has no AI regulation, and that's why they might win, and therefore the US should have none. But that assertion is, I think now less people say it, but it's just completely inaccurate, because in fact, the Chinese government has some would argue way too much regulation already on AI, and it's likely because the government there too sees the ways in which corporate power can get quite big and potentially problematic for their own government too. So yeah, I would say just really read the fine print when it comes to any assertions about China, and our position is less to engage in debates over there and be like, but let's talk about how this is actually going to deliver, not just for some hypothetical AI race, but deliver for American people.
Thank you, Amba. All right, we have a question from Chris Santos Lang. Zero trust includes prohibiting emotion recognition to infer psychological states. But that's something humans do every day, right? Is this realistic policy? If not, how do we get to realistic policy?
So I think that it's really important to distinguish between the way that humans process emotions and the way that AI processes emotions. There's been a really robust set of studies in the research literature that looks at, the use of computers and computer vision to try and infer inner emotional state, and completely disregards the ability for AI to do this effectively. And it sort of definitively says across well over 1,000 research studies that it is impossible with any sort of baseline accuracy to use AI to be able to infer what's going on inside another person's emotional life. So I think, one, use of emotion recognition per the scientific community is pseudoscientific. And then secondly, I think what makes this especially important to consider in a policy setting is that the emotion recognition technology is frequently being deployed in applications where it has, significant consequences on people's lives. Some of the use cases include in hiring settings, using this technology to try and make assessments about a person's personality that can screen out individuals in violation of existing law, in cars to try and infer, is someone an angry driver? Are they sleepy? And that is used by Amazon, for instance, to penalize their drivers. So there are consequences for people on the other side of this technology, which lacks the underlying validity to be put in use in the first place. And for all of those reasons, I think, yes, it is absolutely realistic policy. It's also already enacted policy. So in the UK, the ICO has said, that this is pseudoscientific. And Amba, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is with one of the use cases that is banned under the EU's AI Act as well.
Yeah, in particular social domains. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, both of you. So I'm gonna go to a question from Luna Olivaria Gallegos. I appreciate the approach of critique and care towards AI, and I'm wondering, what is AI now's position in terms of pro-social and positive use cases of large language models? Or is there any company that you think is doing really interesting, novel, and responsible work in terms of the development of AI?
Yeah, so we do have a position on this, and I think we really we started to articulate this in our most recent landscape report, where we spend a bunch of time trying to work through, well, what is the world that we're trying to build and how do we get there? And I think that the key thing that we've landed on is that there absolutely can be a role in society for AI that will be beneficial. It's important that the kinds of social questions and social problems that AI is utilized, one, come from the communities that are grappling with these problems. So, having teachers agree that there's a challenge in the classroom that AI could be useful in fixing, rather than having school districts contract with companies and then require that teachers adopt technology against their will. And also, it's important that the implementation of AI be taken in a broader context. So there are places where maybe a use of AI would have an incremental benefit, but also introduce all kinds of other risks in terms of the data that it's trained on, or the cost, the risk of introducing discriminatory outputs. And so that not only there be clarity that AI can fill a need, but that need does not also introduce other kinds of risks or harms, particularly those that are going to be disproportionately fall upon some groups over others.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So we have a question from Tyler Batillion. I don't think the partisan lines in AI have been clearly drawn yet. I'm curious what the panelists think the biggest agreement between Democrats and Republicans are on AI.
Yeah, thanks. And I 100% agree. I think that's one of our learnings from the moratorium fight, is that there is so much ground that hasn't yet gotten divided on partisan lines, and we need to really shore that up and keep that going. But just to name a few, I think that maybe the most important one, but maybe the underutilized common ground here, is that taming the power of big tech today is a pretty bipartisan rallying cry, right? You might split hairs on where that argument takes some folks versus others, but I think just understanding that there's a problem with that much unaccountable power in private companies is something that probably keeps all political representatives in the US and abroad up at night. The other issue is obviously data centers, I think, and the reason why is because the material effects, whether those are pollution or effects on water supply or effects on people's energy bills, are so material, so immediate. People are feeling the pinch already, and they are going to their constituent. I think lawmakers are hearing from their constituents already that this is something that they're not going to just take lying down. And so again, an issue that we're very grateful hasn't become bipartisan, hasn't become partisan, even though arguably it's infrastructure and infrastructure rollout is going to be one of the key determinants of this industry going forward. As you would imagine that any resistance to it would be painted one way or the other, but that hasn't happened yet. The other obvious one is kids safety. And then and obviously, the one really important thing in the kids safety context was like seeing in the moratorium that there were several groups that were working on children's issues that said, we won't be satisfied if tomorrow you come out and say state law moratorium on everything except kids, because we see the ways in which the safety of children's safety when it comes to AI is interrelated with everyone's privacy when it comes to AI, right? These issues are not siloed. So if the internet and if our AI systems are unsafe for everyone, they're going to be unsafe for kids. And so just kind of making these narrow, superficial carve-outs for kids isn't going to do it. And I think that really pierced through any effort to kind of, take advantage of that, of that piece of it. And then finally, I actually think the labor piece, right? The fact that the White House AI Action Plan has branded itself as a worker-first agenda, even though the agenda, if you look at it, is essentially, creating a fund for reskilling workers once there's mass unemployment or mass displacement. And the other asterisks there is that the Department of Education is tasked with this, that is being defunded actively, or has already been effectively denuded of any capacity. So I think like all of that, but I think the lesson there is that a kind of a pro people, pro worker agenda is still politically salient, and that is and pro all of the issues I mentioned, they have persuasive power. What we really need to build is a ground up and wide constituency that politicians can kind of feel like they have the cover they need when they are on the other side seeing an army of big tech lobbyists.
Absolutely. So we have time for a few more questions here. So I'm going to go to this question from Carla Guzman. How can grassroots networks ensure that artists and frontline communities shape the future of AI, not just adapt to it?
I think it's a great question. So I mean, like, first is rejecting the inevitability premise, right? Like ensuring that like we never operate from the presumption that there is anything about this technology that's inevitable, and that there is tremendous scope to reshape its future in ways that are broadly beneficial. Secondly, we're already seeing, particularly from labor groups, successful enactment of like policies or like negotiating terms on which like workers get to determine whether and under what conditions AI gets used. We saw this with the WGA agreement, for example, where they said, it's writers, not studios, that get to say whether they use AI or choose not to use AI. Similarly, we saw in Pennsylvania, the SEIU local, like the Service Employees Union, negotiated an agreement with the state of Pennsylvania that there's going to be a workers' council that gets to weigh in and ultimately determine what kinds of AI tools are going to be used by the state government. So I think that those offer a really valuable blueprint for being able to reshape the way that AI is going to be rolled out in ways that are reflective of the communities that are going to be most affected by it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna have a couple more questions here. So we have a question from Prakar Pandey. It's a fairly long question, so I'm gonna just answer or read to you a part of that question. Thank you for organizing this discussion. Always a privilege to get to know AI Now Institute's work. My question's on a different note, one on strategy for influencing policymaking. Given the zero regulation strategy of the government, Is it a good strategy to throw a laundry list of compliances/standards in the public to really give the government needless grounds to see policy experts as troublemakers, or to really push for the essentials, trust and safety standards, for example? Would either of you like to address that critique of this strategy angle?
Yes, great question, and I would say always proud to show up as a troublemaker. But I think there's a few things in there that maybe I would like throw slightly different color on, which might shift the conclusion. One is that even though this administration's top line note has been one that is anti-regulation, right? Vice President Vance's speech very much kind of said it's regulation versus innovation. I think that when it comes down to it, and we've seen this at multiple levels, including in the moratorium fight, there is much more bipartisan consensus in this country that some regulation of this industry is a pretty common sense premise. And the fact that there is a vacuum is pretty disturbing, I think, to the vast majority of the public per recent polling, but equally their political representatives. So I don't think we cede the ground immediately that we need to somehow repackage all of our claims or walk around the idea that some guardrails are urgently needed and missing. I think that is now a more and more, we should assert that as the common sense, and we should paint any attempt to position that as anti-progress as just a kind of straight industry lobbying talking point. And then I think just like, pushing for the essentials is a good way, I understand what you're potentially getting at is like some kind of a prioritization. I think that is key and is informing our strategy right now. So of all of the laundry list of things we could do, as you say, what are the not just the most important and most effective, but really like what are affecting people's pocketbooks, what are going to move people to actually get behind their their lawmakers and really push something forward. And those issues are the ones I mentioned, right? It's data centers, it's algorithmic prices, algorithmic wages, it's kid safety. And so I think we are, as a broader movement of policy advocates, narrowing down on what that list is and really prioritizing the kind of issue that allows people to join the dots between why is this big power concentration over there actually bad for my life in an everyday sense? Why should I push back against it, make my voice heard, and then push my political representative to do something about it? So that confluence of factors is really important and what we want to focus on.
Really appreciate that. Go ahead, Sarah. Yes.
Just to jump in, that's where we've also seen a lot of legislative success. Like to underscore what Amba said, it's like those narrowly tailored rules that actually deliver things that people can tangibly feel in their lives. Those are the bills that have tended to pass. Those are the bills that also, I think, directly, show to a broader public that there is a value to regulation that is going to tangibly affect them, rather than sort of taking the broader, diffuse, and more abstract approach.
Yes, thank you. All right, and we're going to close with one question that I think is very salient for hopefully for everyone, and that is from Chinasam Igwe. What's your best advice for a high schooler who's interested in both the technical side, but also policy, humanities side? Is it really possible to pursue a career that uses both sides?
Yes, I guess that's like the answer you would expect us to give. But well, firstly, it's amazing that if you are in fact a high schooler or asking for a high schooler friend, it's exciting that that's a question on people's mind. I would say that so Sarah and I were part of efforts within the Federal Trade Commission to create an office of technologists that were kind of supporting the regulator and supporting the agency with their tech enforcement cases. And in the process of working through that, we really came upon this very interesting question, which is like, what is the right kind of acumen that we need to get at some of these gnarly questions of getting under the hood of what companies are doing and eventually actually holding them accountable? And perhaps this is obvious, but I think it is that perfect mix of not just technical intuition, but understanding that you could have the best, technical intentions, but the business models, the incentives that are powering those are as important. So looking for people that are equally adept at sort of understanding markets, market structures, market incentives, as well as have a fluency. And I'm avoiding the term I don't think this means you have to be an engineer, right? Like I think you want to be able to not be splaned back by tech companies, and to the point of are their careers, I think in that sweet spot of understanding markets, understanding technology, and understanding the need for accountability, there are a growing number of jobs in the space. And the one I was mentioning was obviously within government agencies, but there's a growing set of both private sector and civil society positions that are looking for that exact combination of skill sets.
And of course, I also wanted to throw that question out there because that is something that All Tech is Human is very centered on. And we have an entire work stream around responsible tech careers that are exactly at that intersection, and the importance of having a wide variety of disciplines involved in building these technologies, because they impact all of us. So yes, if you're curious about that, please visit alltechishuman.org. You'll find all kinds of information about that. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate both of you joining me today. I hope we can do more of this because this is, there's obviously a lot of hunger for this kind of conversation, and I appreciate all of the people who chimed in with questions, and thank you for a really active chat as well. So yeah, I want to thank our guests for taking the time out today for this conversation, and I want to say you can follow Amba and Sarah's work at ainowinstitute.org. You'll find everything that they've been talking about today. You'll find a link to the People's AI Action Plan so you can get involved as well. And then also please make sure you follow up, keep up with what All Tech is Human is doing. We are at alltechishuman.org. So thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.